Oh, all right. So, welcome everybody to our first talk of the Diversifying Design series. I think we have like a combination of East Lake students, and then we have some uh, college students in UW Design as well, and we also have obviously Professor Cheng. So I think this is like a really nice combination of students and like people who are in different walks of life who are really interested in design. Um, and yeah, today we're gonna have Shawn Terasaki, who is a UW alum, who also grew up here in Sammamish. He works as an experience designer at Airbnb right now, um, and he's just gonna share a little bit about his journey in design, how he got into it, some tips and advice for high school students, and then maybe after that we'll open it up for some student-driven Q&A. All right,
Awesome.
so Shawn, you can go ahead.
Sweet. Let me just share my screen. Oh, actually, it says the host has disabled participant screen sharing. Is there any way to get
Oh
access for that?
yeah, let me make you a host. I think that's what I have to do. Make host. Okay, I think you should have the ability to do that
Perfect.
now. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Share keynote. The stuff has never gotten easier, I feel like, even in COVID. Okay. You share. You should see a white screen, right?
Yeah, we see a white screen.
Okay. Cool, cool. Let me just adjust the little avatars. Cool. Well, also, I should caveat that this presentation was something I wanted to spend a lot more time on. Um, but work got really busy. So this is all made this morning. So hopefully there aren't too many mistakes or anything. But yeah, just want to say hello, and thanks for having me. I'm joining you all the way from New York City, and the mere fact that it's like 2022 and we're like doing this through teleconferencing is pretty cool. I think that in itself would actually be a really fantastic case study for design, but I'll save that for another time. Where is my mouse? Cool. So, as Shrestha said, my name is Shawn Terasaki. I'm an experienced designer working for Airbnb. But before that, I actually studied visual communication design at University of Washington. And before that, I grew up in Sammamish and went to Issaquah High School. So all that to say, it's like a pleasure to be here. And I have a whole lot of love for the Pacific Northwest. I also want to say it's really incredible. Me and Karen were just talking about it before this, but that you all are in like a design club in high school. I think it's like really refreshing to see that people's appetites for the field are growing stronger. And I'm a big fan of the fact that you guys even have this club in the first place. Like, it's really awesome. So today I've been invited here to share with you all about my personal journey with the discipline of design, and also talk about like what I do as a designer, and how that drives impact. And then to finish off, I'll give a piece of parting advice. First, though, I want to caveat that part of what makes kind of the design industry so unique is that it's relatively new and being acknowledged in like mainstream culture. You can study the topic and the category. So I think that, coupled with like the creative nature of the industry, ends up generating so many unique journeys and pathways for people finding design. So you often find that designers have diverse stories, education backgrounds, passions, and timelines for being exposed to the field. And so my story is just like one example of this. But for me, I have always been drawn to the world of art. I think my parents always joked that I learned how to draw before I knew how to talk. And obviously, that's a bit of an exaggeration, in my opinion, but you get the idea. Like, I really loved art. For me, the joy of creating art was always closely coupled with learning new things. I remember discovering Microsoft Paint on the computer and immediately starting to draw all my friends in cartoon form. And they'd all use these caricatures as their profile pictures on MySpace, which I definitely recognize I'm dating myself by talking about Microsoft Paint and MySpace to high schoolers. But now, although I loved paint, or I loved painting, and I loved drawing, I never considered these passions as like potential career paths. Because you see, my family was full of doctors and engineers and teachers, and they helped people and they built things and they simplified complex issues into very simple ones. So art, while enjoyable for me, felt really aimless and meaningless. But fast forward to 2009, I'm a freshman in high school, and my mom was actually watching ABC Nightline one night, which I don't even have I don't know if it even exists anymore. But she saw a news segment talking about a company called IDEO, who use something called design thinking to innovate and develop new products through design. Now you can find this exact video on YouTube, as I did when prepping for this, and you can tell how old it is just by the resolution and like aspect ratio alone. But the main idea of their methodology was that curiosity and learning, when harnessed correctly, can lead to innovation, and they called this design. They basically grabbed people from all kinds of disciplines, so marketing, biology, engineering, people that you wouldn't really expect would work well together, and put them in a room and have them design a solution. In this example, they were redesigning a shopping cart, and the idea was that diverse expertise and diverse thought would yield the optimal product. So my mom told me something like, "Wow, that's so cool. You should work for them one day," or something like that. And I too thought the whole thing sounded pretty neat. But like most high schoolers, I promptly forgot about what my mom said and kept doing my own thing. I dabbled in photography and graphic design, designing t-shirts for random, school events and posters. I used to make YouTube videos with friends and spend hours learning how to edit and cut things. And then I did yearbook in high school, and I always felt flattered that friends and family would call me artistic or creative. But like I said earlier, it still held little merit for me in thinking about my future. Fast forward to 2012, and I was at UW and still doing a bunch of creative things in my free time, but not really taking it seriously as a career path. And an upperclassman that had seen some of my stuff had recommended I take the introductory design class. And just like the interaction with my mom, I politely nodded and then ignored his advice until a year later. But once I took this class, it changed mostly everything for me, at least academically. I finally kind of understood what capital D design was and how vastly different it was from concepts of graphic design or simply art. It was grounded in solving real tangible problems and required more than just my creative mind, but also my pragmatic and scientific mind. So now if you learn anything from this like short talk, I just want it to be this, that everything is designed and that design matters. And I want to unpack that for a quick minute. When I say everything is designed, what I really mean is that at some point, somebody made a decision to do something a certain way. And that decision, whether it was a quick millisecond in their head, like a gut reaction to do something a certain way, or weeks and weeks of thinking about it, it's all design. Perhaps the easiest definition I can give to you is that to design is really to decide. And thinking, think about the way that maybe you tie your shoes, like somebody designed that process and you follow it. Or the utensils you use to eat your food at lunch, like someone designed a fork, someone designed a spoon and a knife. Or the way groceries are categorized at the Trader Joe's down the block, which I used to frequent a lot. Somebody decided that that was the most helpful way to do that, right? To organize the shelves. And all of these decisions that people made, they're all design. So if anything you remember from today, to design is to decide. So safe to say, I was really drawn to this world of design immediately, but it did take some reorienting of my definitions and preconceptions, mostly that anything artistic had no real business in the pragmatic and objective world of math and science, but I was very wrong. You see, design is about problem solving. It's about creating solutions that help people. And while that can use art, design is so much bigger than just what something looks like visually. It is the intersection of creativity and science. And similar to the various professions I found in my family, I kind of finally found an avenue where I was able to help people, I was able to build things, and I was able to simplify. And then anyways, to make it kind of full circle back to 2009, during the summer of my junior year in college, I had the privilege of interning at IDEO in San Francisco. So maybe the real takeaway is just to listen to your mom. They often have great advice, so I should have taken it a lot earlier. After graduating, I moved down to the Bay Area and actually worked at Airbnb in their art department. Had some really great connections through my professors, and they kind of connected me with people that were hiring at the time. And I spent about a year there learning about the intersection of brand and marketing. And while this was not what I originally wanted to work on, I saw it kind of as an opportunity to get my foot in the door. So I worked on a lot of video projects, defining lower thirds frameworks for how we use type with video and really documenting that process. I also created brand systems for our social franchises. It just, each one was uniquely different and kind of needed its own expression. And basically just a ton of motion work for social campaigns and what have you. It was all very fun and enjoyable. But it wasn't exactly the work I knew I wanted to be working on long term. I also got to help work with their interior design team and conceptualize new spaces for our offices. And the list just goes on, right? Like they were very fun projects, very enjoyable projects. But like I said, ultimately I knew this isn't the type of design work I was wanting to be a part of. I was then kind of recruited by, I think, honestly, just kind of luck and chance to work in Airbnb's research and development incubator called Propel. And basically, we focused on emerging and future-facing technology for consumers. And so we attempted to envision what Airbnb in the future could be, specifically about 5 to 10 years out. So if you can imagine what type of phones or what type of tablets you'll have in 5 to 10 years, that's what we were trying to imagine and then see what we could do with it. So I mostly worked on photogrammetry projects that involved using cloud anchors to document and capture three-dimensional spaces and utilize the information to generate dynamic and two-scale floor plans. As you can imagine, working at Airbnb, one of the most highly demanded things that people want is floor plans to understand the space, to understand bedrooms and their relationship to each other. And so this is something that I really enjoyed getting to work on and sink my teeth into. We then could also use AI to recognize amenities within a home that are important to know about, like fire extinguishers and first aid kits. Or you can imagine for accessibility issues, like making sure that there's no lips entering into homes so that wheelchairs can get in. All these applications were things we got to kind of present to leadership, and it was, yeah, really great. I later moved over to the core business side of Airbnb, like hosting, whether you be a guest or a host, like what are those screens like? And spent, my time working on projects related to regulatory work, travel insurance, reimagining hosting on Airbnb, and kind of am now working in Airbnb experiences. And I would have showed more work here, but honestly, since I created this presentation this morning, it was a little hard to track down a lot of the Figma files that we were in. So now hopefully that kind of gives you like a high level view of my journey. But now I'd love to kind of explain more about what does it mean to be an experienced designer. I know you have a few different people coming to talk to you guys over the next few weeks. And, experienced designer is not something that everyone just kind of colloquially knows. And the first thing I want to clarify is that the design industry's vocabulary is pretty funky and honestly not the most helpful. And I think part of that is because it's a relatively new field, at least as far as being recognized in the public eye. And so when you tell someone you work in design, they could think a lot of things. They could think you work in fashion, or that you're a graphic designer, or you're marketing, engineering, you're an architect. The list goes on. But when I say I'm an experienced designer, this is synonymous with product design or UX design, which maybe you're more familiar with those terms. But they all are the same thing. We do the same things on our day to day. And the key takeaway is that when I say I'm an experienced designer, what I'm really meaning is I design how people experience the internet. And that's where we kind of get the experience part. It's the entire kind of full experience. And that translates to companies and products like Facebook, Google, or Amazon, who use computers, tablets, and phones to provide a service for people like you and me. So the main point of, whether you're in UX design or product design or an experience designer, you're designing these digital experiences. Now, since I work at Airbnb, I carry the responsibility, or at least part of the responsibility of making sure that when people use our app, that they can find what they're looking for, that they can get inspired by the wonder of travel, and that they feel taken care of if something goes wrong along the way. And we do this by following what we call a design process. And so much like IDEO or other design companies, we brainstorm, we ideate, we design, we prototype, we conduct research, and we refine until our digital experiences are hopefully elegant, simple, and easy to use. So my job is really to help people experience Airbnb in a delightful way, which is pretty fun. And that's, hopefully a kind of operating mode that is not frustrating or annoying for them. They should be able to do, everything they intend to. Now, since we're all creatures of habit, a big part of design is consistency, like making sure that our app feels cohesive and all the different screens feel like one family. So even within experience design or product design or UX design, as I said, is all the same thing. People can specialize in things like prototyping, designing icons, or creating systems that help other designers design. And then here's a video that's a quick 1 minute, but it explains how we create consistency here at Airbnb. Okay, so now if all of this is still a bit confusing, I also have a very simple metaphor that was helpful for me when I was younger. And it's this: experience design or UX is how something works. It's not what it looks like. It's the how, it's not the what. And an experienced designer would look at these two ketchup bottles, for example, and say that the first and foremost thing that we look at to see if they're, how we measure their value is how they are experienced, not what they appear to look like. So the one on the left looks nice, right? Like it's very pretty. I'm sure you guys have seen it if you go to a diner or any, fast food restaurant. Um, but we all know it's kind of a pain to use when you need ketchup. Sometimes it can spill all over the place. You kind of have to hit it on the back of the bottle. And the form should really follow the function, which I think you guys probably are already on to since the name of your club. But rather than saying the best bottle is the one that looks the nicest, we side with the one that provides the simplest solution to the problem, which in this case, right, is getting ketchup onto your food. And so the bottle on the right is maybe a more successful design in an experienced designer's opinion. And that leads me to the topic of impact. That ketchup bottle experience can be annoying to go through, like I said, but the stakes are relatively low. Either way, you should get your ketchup on your food or your omelet or whatever it is. But when you work on digital experiences on the internet, impact is multiplied vastly for people, for the better and also for the worse. And so the improvements we make can help millions of people, or they can actually frustrate and deter millions of people from booking Airbnbs or using Facebook or posting an Instagram post or even getting the news that they really require on a day-to-day basis. I said earlier that a simple, definition of design is to decide, and that is why our decisions as professional designers matter so much. We, as a company, obviously help people travel and explore new places, but we also enable people to experience different cultures and have family time with loved ones on vacation, and seek refuge from danger. And anytime you have the ability to decide on the behalf of so many people, you also have a responsibility to listen often. So I have one more video for you all, and this is an example of why it is so important to know your users and to listen to them frequently.
Shawn, is there audio for the video?
Oh, sorry, is the audio not coming through?
Yeah.
Oh, did the audio not come through for the previous video?
No, I think I just assumed that it wasn't an audio
Oh
video.
no, I'm so sorry. Okay. Share computer sound.
Also, while you're at it, could you, if there are people in the waiting room, could you let them in?
Oh, yes. Um, got it.
Awesome. Thank
Okay,
you.
let me try this one more time. Let's see if the video plays.
Yeah.
Already,
How's the
Hurricane
audio?
Sandy is the most
I can hear.
destructive
Good? Okay.
hurricane of 2012. Sandy's unprecedented flooding is displacing thousands of people across the eastern
Dear
seaboard.
Airbnb, I have an idea. Seeing thousands of people have lost their homes to Hurricane Sandy, I want to find a way to help. My apartment is available. I'm wondering if I could list it for free.
Where does a movement start? This one started with one host named Shell, one inspiring idea that went and inspired thousands of others to open their homes to strangers who need it most, creating a movement built by you, and you, and you. And where we go from here is everywhere.
Yeah, so like I said earlier, this is an example of why it's so important to know your users and to listen to them because they have great ideas. And, for us, for example, we had a very generous user group where a lot of them wanted to open up their homes for disaster relief, for, um, emergencies. And so even with things like the Ukraine war, Airbnb is committed to housing, I believe, 100,000 refugees. And so it's really cool that, ideas like this can really spawn from the people that you're designing for. And so we have to be careful as designers, right, not to design just for ourselves. Because you see, design is impactful because our decisions are, and we hope to make the best decisions we can. And um, obviously there's no perfect design, but I think in the course of a career of a designer, you really hope to make more good decisions than more bad ones, right? Because me not trying to consider how someone might be experiencing our product can actually be a big issue. For example, the most common user of Airbnb does not live in the United States and actually does not speak English as their primary language. And so for me, as an English speaker living in the United States, it's very easy to make a lot of these decisions. But when it comes to users who read right to left, or certain imagery does not mean the same thing. We have to be very cognizant and make sure that we're backing up our decisions with research and with insights from the teams that are on the ground and able to talk to people. And finally, just a quick piece of kind of parting advice, which is that good design is invisible, which sounds a little precarious and provocative, hopefully. But design is like breathing, which I always try to explain to people. Like, now I know for most of us, right, breathing is second nature, but I want you to imagine that you're scuba diving for the first time in the ocean. And I'd bet that you would be hyper aware of the fact that your life depends on your ability to breathe fresh air for that little air canister on your back, right? I'm sure even if you've gone snorkeling, you kind of experience that, right? You're apprehensive to really trust the breathing apparatus or to get the air into your body. So here's my question for you to kind of think about: is breathing more important in a classroom or underwater? And I think you kind of see where this is going. Like, if you're like me, your gut reaction would be like, oh, it's underwater. But it's a trick question because breathing matters all the time. And this is how most of the world kind of views design. Like, many people think that design is only important when you need something, like you need a graphic t-shirt, you need a poster, you need a snappy logo. And that's not exactly it. Design is like air. And this is what I think they, being most of the world who maybe is not involved in design, is missing, is design is like air. It is everywhere, but we're just more aware of it when we don't trust it. And here's my second question. To continue the scuba diving metaphor, how do you know when you're a skilled scuba diver? Well, it's when it's natural, right? It's when it's second nature. And you're a skilled scuba diver when you no longer are worried about the breathing. You get to actually just fully experience, whatever you're seeing underwater, the sharks, the fish, the coral. But you're no longer worried about how am I getting air. And when you can trust the air because you know that it works and has worked time and time again, you can stop thinking about it so much because it works as it's expected to. And that's a big part of design, right? If we do a good job, then design should work as it's expected to. So good design is invisible, not because it doesn't matter or even that it's not present. Like we said, right? Design is everywhere and design matters. So good design is invisible, not because it doesn't matter, but because it's working so well. So in some sense, the burden, the responsibility, and joy of being a designer, specifically an experienced designer who designs digital experiences for people, is getting to tackle big problems and create solutions so elegant that everyday people might even take them for granted. One of the biggest kind of compliments actually as a designer is when people don't realize that you've put so much thought and so much care into how something is done. If you think about, anytime you're texting on an iPhone, the amount of UX design and engineering work that has gone into making sure the keyboard knows what you're trying to predict and write. Like, all those experiences are things that we just expect to happen. Like, of course, I'm trying to type this word, so of course it should know. But those are all very large design feats. But getting to tackle these big problems, create solutions so elegant that everyday people might even take them for granted, just like breathing air. Thank you so much for having me. And I think there's still time, obviously, if anyone has questions or anything. But either way, whether you decide to become a designer, in college or post-college, it's a really exciting field. And honestly, is kind of, I felt very fortunate to find it and stumble upon it. So it's so cool that you guys are talking about this stuff in high school. And it's a very diverse and ever-growing field. All right.
Thank you so much,
I'll
Shawn,
stop sharing.
for your really amazing presentation. I can't believe that you said that you put that whole thing together this morning. That's that's unbelievable. But yeah, I think I really appreciate how you talked a lot about how design is not just like the really obvious things, like designing logos when people need a logo or creating a poster. It's really like it's more about the function and more about the way it works rather than how it looks. And I think that's something that we're really trying to talk about here at our design club is that a lot of people have great misconceptions about what design means and that it's not very useful. Um, but yeah, I think you really stressed that important difference, and that's really awesome. So I have a few questions that I collected here on a form, but I
Great.
will open it up to people who have questions right now. So if you have a question, you can just raise your hand, and then we'll call on you.
Also, no pressure if you don't have any questions, but don't be shy. I won't bite. Yeah.
Okay, so I think we got them in the chat. Oh, wait, Sammy, do you want to ask your question first?
Sure, yeah. I'm just gonna shout it out loud. I was gonna ask, have you ever like dealt with difficulties of usually you design with a given topic, right? And then you guide yourself in. Have you ever like dealt with difficulties of maybe not clicking with that topic, but you still have to push through? And like, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I think the audio was a little broken up, but correct me if I'm wrong. You're asking, there's sometimes times you have to design for a topic you're not maybe personally like interested in?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it definitely happens a lot. I mean, I think, even within an industry, like I work for Airbnb, so a lot of my projects are travel based, right? Or people based. And I think part of that is, wanting to make sure you're at a place where you can grow, where you can learn. But, even in concepts like, or constructs like school, right? Like there are projects where maybe I have to make a infographic to educate people about, the history or the timeline of chocolate. Like, I may not be personally passionate about chocolate, but I think there's a certain curiosity within designers that is willing to take on a certain type of challenge. So for me, that can look like, oh, maybe I'm not into chocolate, but I'm really curious about how much can I learn and how much can I convey to then a person that doesn't really care about chocolate, right? So it gives you kind of a unique perspective to say, I may not be interested in this, and that means probably other people are also not interested in this. How maybe can I take it on as a challenge and say, I want to dive into this field, try to become an expert as quickly as possible, and then distill it or synthesize it into a design or an experience that will hopefully engage people that maybe wouldn't seek that out from the get-go.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have quite a few questions in the chat. I'm not sure who that is, but they asked that I have a question. What's the median income for jobs in the design field?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think and I want to caveat that like capital D design, right, includes so many types of design. So if you're like a graphic designer, visual designer, it's quite all over the place. I can only speak on behalf of like what I've seen on tech bands within tech. But if you're doing like user experience design or you're doing product design, that can span anywhere from probably 50,000 to in like beginner roles to um, you know 250 to 300K, depending on kind of your seniority and your experience. So if you end up becoming a designer and then you kind of make your way up, you become a design lead, and then after that you can become like a design director or a head of design. That's where the kind of pay bands become exponentially higher. But it kind of roughly is around there, I'd say. It also, another factor to think about is the size of the company, right? If you're working for a startup, they often have to be very tight with their money, so they might pay less, but you get a lot more exposure. Versus if you work for a big company like Google, they might pay you a lot more to make sure that they have the best talent there. So, yeah, that's a great question, though.
And then we have Mahi asking, what did you study in college?
Yeah. So coming out of high school, I was actually hoping to major in architecture or something in the science fields. But then when I found design, I was very fortunate because UW has a really robust design program. So for UW, they have basically the School of Art, but then within the School of Art, there's a division of design, which Karen Chang, one of the professors, she was here at the beginning. And the neat thing about their program is it's kind of this trifecta of design. So for the first 2 years of school, I actually learned like visual design, which is a lot more like branding and like logos and icons and posters and all that kind of thing. But then you also learn user experience design, which is like how do you create digital products, and then you actually create you also study a third branch, which is industrial design, which is the design of like physical objects. So whether it be the chairs you're sitting in right now, the computers you're tapping on, like the physical manifestation of whatever experience it is. That's industrial design. So even those ketchup bottles I showed earlier, like that, like an industrial designer built those plastic casings, chose the material, the affordances. Yeah.
Awesome. So now we have Nicole is asking, do you know anything about the motion design field in UW?
Huh. I actually wasn't aware if they have like a motion design like focus or like a major, but I will say within division design, which is what I know at least, you do quite a bit of motion, just because I think, especially as technology grows, like we become more and more reliant on our phones and digital experiences. Motion is kind of a reality we have to kind of live into. So, um, the fact that we're using our phones so much more, like we kind of need to be adept in using motion to convey information, to, kind of mimic, honestly, the physical world in a digital space. So, um, yeah, I can't give you much advice on motion design, but I do know, like, if you are interested in motion design, that's something that maybe is very akin to visual communication design, which is at UW, um, or other potentially graphic design positions too.
Mahi has another question, and he's asking, do you know about the communication design major in UW?
Yeah, so I believe I believe what you might be referring to is the visual communication design major, which is the one I actually majored in. So, yeah, if you go to UW, you choose to major in division of design. You actually get to choose between the three. So I maybe called it visual design, but what it really is visual communication design. Um, and then there's I forgot what they call it. They don't call it UX design. Interaction design is what they call it, and industrial design. So if you go there, they kind of refer to them as like VCD, IXD, which is interaction design, and then ID, which is industrial. Yeah.
And Sarah has two questions. Um, what kinds, first question, what kinds of majors would you say are best for jobs in UX design and other design fields?
Yeah, that's a great question. Like I said, I mean, UX design is a pretty new field. Like a lot of the senior designers that I work with, they weren't able to study design because it wasn't a formalized program wherever they studied. So a lot of them had backgrounds in photography or like magazine layouts, like actual print design. And so they were designing in things like Photoshop and whatnot. And so all that to say, like, what kinds of majors are best? I mean, I think any school that even has a UX design program is off to a great start. Like, they will definitely teach you the essentials and the basics. But that said, there's also a lot of unconventional paths people take. Like, I know designers who never did design school and either did a boot camp after they, went to college, or they just kind of picked it up on the side. I will say, like, that's not to say like a degree doesn't matter. Like I think it definitely helps in getting you into the door of companies. And I think I shared earlier, but when I first started working at Airbnb, it was actually in more of a graphic design kind of marketing role. And so for me, it was hard to even prove to them that I could do UX design, even though I knew I could. But because my degree was in visual communication design, um, it was harder to present my work in a way that convinced them. So it took some time, but eventually got there. Other than
Right.
that, I know a lot of other programs have some great programs too. I think Western has a really great industrial design program. Like I think they're one of the best in the West Coast, if I'm not mistaken. Um, but yeah,
Yeah, and then I had a quick follow-up question to that, which was like going off of this thing where like um, there aren't that many design programs. I mean, there are a lot more than there used to be. But how do you transition from like majoring in something like visual communication design to then working in like really tech-based companies, like kind of what you're talking about?
okay.
Um, is it an easy transition, or how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's easy in some respects, right? Like it's easy because the fields are very related. But I think the hard part is just proving to people that you know what you're talking about. And UX design is a confusing thing, right? Because with that ketchup bottle example, everyone wants to talk about what does something look like. And they'll be like, "Oh, you're a good designer if you can make something look nice." But it's so much more than that, right? Because it's more about showing like how you think. And so, whether you show someone a portfolio and you're like, hey, here's ketchup bottles everywhere or whatever, like the thing that they really want to see in a UX design portfolio is how are you thinking about the ketchup bottle? Like, yes, it's pretty or whatever, and it's you can squeeze it so it comes out, a lot smoother. But the real thing is to say, well, what did you consider in designing it this way, and how were you thoughtful? Because, like I said, right, to design is to decide. So all your decisions, you have to be able to kind of point back to like, I decided to do this because it's going to be a better experience. And it becomes a very weak argument if you say, well, I decided to do this because I felt like it. Like that's not a very compelling story. And I think within design, whether you're doing UX design or visual design, something they have in common that you can kind of leverage is storytelling. Like the best way you can tell a story is how you can convince people of anything really. And a really great example of storytelling, I would say, is if you ever look on YouTube, it's also an old video, but the 2007 announcement video where Steve Jobs talks about the first iPhone ever. It's a really masterful demonstration of storytelling. Like, what is he trying to say? He's trying to say, hey, we're merging a phone and the iPod together. But the way he tells about the story is a great way because that's how you get people to buy in is through your storytelling. So yeah, although I was a visual designer by education, I had a lot of background in UX design and fortunately also had the storytelling aspect. So I was able to frame my story in a way that explained what I could do in the field of UX.
Yeah, I think that regardless of what you go into, I think that's like something that you kind of have to face as a designer all the time because design is kind of like a tool almost. So you're going to be using it for like different things, like whether it's tech or if you're going into like sustainability design or things like that. There's always
Mhm.
learning that you need to do that's involved with it. And then we have another pretty popular question, which is at UW, do you know the difference between human centered design, which is in the engineering program, versus doing a design major that's from the art program?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, and it's something I think even people at UW don't fully understand the difference. But fortunately, I do because one, I went through one of the programs, but then I've gone back in the last several years to recruit from UW. In fact, Cynthia in this group is I don't think we recruited her, but yeah, she's a great student there too, or was. And I would say the biggest difference is maybe what they focus on, right? I think uh, Division of Design, which is in the School of Art, I think they care a lot about um, kind of crafting you as a thinker. Like I said, right, to design is to decide. So the way we think, the way we process things is pretty important. But there's also this aspect of being really human. Like to be a good designer doesn't mean you just read all the design books and you always are designing. Like a lot of being a designer is being empathetic and being able to understand where someone's coming from and then be able to kind of advocate for them when you're designing an experience. I think within the HCDE program, which stands for Human Centered Design and Engineering, they're maybe a little bit more methods based, which I think there's an important distinguishing factor between process um, and kind of this sorry, methods based. And so I think with methods, what they were really teaching a lot is how to do things, which can mean how to conduct research in a way that's less biased, or how to collect insights and then kind of synthesize those things into research. From my understanding, and even when I've interviewed students that are looking for internships in college that are in these programs, I would say honestly the level of craft maybe is a little higher and more polished in the division of design because I think they have that trifecta approach, right? They obviously design is not just about what it looks like, but once you kind of know where you need to go, right? Once you know the usability of a ketchup bottle, you still do need to be able to actually polish it and say, this is how you can really tell that story. I think within HCDE, although it's also a fantastic program, I think they maybe focus a lot more on methodology. And so because of that, they have a really refined idea of research. Um, And so I think, depending on if you want to be a UX designer, I would probably recommend going into the School of Art Division of Design, because it's so well-rounded. If you're really interested in research and analytics and data science, like I think that's where maybe HCDE is a more helpful path. Because I find that I think students who come out of the HCDE program maybe lack a little bit of the hard skills. And I think when you're a designer professional, you have to have the whole package, right? You have to be able to design visually, but you also have to be able to think on high level, broad concepts. So yeah, that's kind of the differentiation, I'd say. But it's different schools. So one School of Art, School of Engineering, but I'm a little biased also, so take that with a grain of salt.
So would you say that the HCDE program is kind of like a niche in design, like specifically focused on research methodology in engineering specifically?
Yeah, I don't know if I'd say it exactly that way. Like, I don't think it's necessarily niche, but I actually think it might be a bigger population group at UW than the Division of Design. At least when I was going through the coursework, there were about 20 of us in each of the three design disciplines. So my entire class was only about 50 to 60 people. My understanding, at least from HCDE, is they actually have quite a few more, because people, find their way to HCDE through things like informatics or even, computer science, and then they decide to not want to be the actual people coding, but they want to, kind of do something else that kind of contributes to that. Um, so yeah, I guess it's more like comparing apples and oranges. But from the work I've seen, I think I've always been maybe a little bit more leaning towards um, the division of design as far as their skills being maybe more applicable to the professional workspace.
Hmm. Definitely. All right. So if anybody has any more questions, now would be the time to ask them. Um, oh, yeah, we got another question from Mahi. What types of things can you do in high school that would help you to get into the UW design program?
Ah, yes. So the UW design program is unique because they don't do anything like early, admittance or anything. Basically, as soon as you are a freshman, you can take a class called Design 166, which is, the introduction class, and it'll be very clear on like the rubrics and stuff. But the way they did it, at least when I was there, was you had three projects in one quarter. So one kind of leaned towards visual design and seeing how, kind of creative and artistic can you be. One project was really focused on like user experience, like how do you think about how someone uses something, not just what it looks like. And then there's a third project that's industrial design focused, so it's a lot more about um, building a physical object, and that might involve time in the wood shop or building things with your hands. And basically, if you got like a 3.7 GPA uh, uh, as a cumulative kind of score of those three projects, then you could actually get automatically admitted into the design program. If you didn't get a 3.7, and then maybe that number has changed since then, but if you didn't get that number, you also had another opportunity, which is that in the summer of your freshman year, you could take a design workshop, and that's actually how the majority of people get into the design program. And basically, it's like a 8-hour day. They sit you down with a whole bunch of other students who are trying to get in, and you basically are given like an assignment, like a design problem, and you have to solve it and show all your work, all your process. It's really fun. That's how I got into the program. And yeah, sorry, I don't want to stray from the question too much, but what type of things can you do in high school that would, yeah, I would say honestly, just exploring different tools. Like I think something I really appreciate about the design program at UW is they don't necessarily say, hey, I'm going to teach you Illustrator, or I'm going to teach you Adobe Photoshop or After Effects, or I'm going to teach you Figma. Because they understand that to be a designer is really not about the software. It's really about your mind. It's really about how you tackle problems. So, the things you can do in high school, honestly, is kind of pretending to flex those muscles already, right? Like whether you're in a sports team or you're in a debate club or really, I don't know, maybe you drive to work because you love cars or something, and like there's so many design problems that you can start to think about, how can I solve these? And some of them may have visual representation, some of them may have an app. Like you don't have to build an app to be a UX designer, um, because ultimately we're all experiencing kind of the world we're in. So I think something that you can do in high school is start practicing the appreciation for good design, but then also noticing when bad design is there, right? Like you don't notice bad design until it inconveniences your life. You might sit down at a desk and like it's wobbly, and you're like, well, this sucks, right? The design is awful, and it's like, or your knee hits the top of it, and you're like, well, this chair shouldn't be so tall. Like these are all design problems. So thinking about that, or maybe you're in the lunch line and you see that it's a very informal way, like everyone's getting clogged at the spot where you have to like put in your pin or whatever. Like those are all design problems you can start thinking about, like how would I solve this and how would I make sure that it's a good decision, not just for me but for everyone else at the school. um, yeah, I think other things you can do, like because like I said, I think being a designer, like yes, it requires skills and artistic ability and stuff, but at the same time, like it also requires you just to be a human and like be compassionate towards people. So I think being well-rounded is a really good thing. And maybe I should have said this also with the prior question, but when it comes to you potentially wanting to look at like a design program, um, I know for me, I think I really appreciate when designers come from places where they're well educated with other topics than design, right? Like maybe they're taking classes in sociology or math and science, because in the end, right, like similar to that IDEO type mindset, the more kind of difference of thought and like the ways you can be an expert in all sorts of different fields, like that really helps you as a designer. So yeah.
So I think you already answered this question, but Sarah asked, since it's in the art school, do you know if an art portfolio is needed for the division of design program? And I,
Yeah, that's a great question, but I don't believe so because it's kind of run independently. It just kind of sits organizationally under the School of Art.
mhm. So it would just be
Yeah.
taking the class, the Design 166 class.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And once you're in the major, I mean, there are some classes you need to take that fall under the School of Art kind of program. So there's, art history classes you take and things like that, art appreciation. Yeah.
Mhm. And then Cynthia put a note about um, the difference. She said, another difference I have noticed is that the interaction design programs at School of Art and Design has a more structured and packed schedule. You usually have at least two classes from the design program you have to take each quarter, planned by the design school to build up your skills systematically. And through these classes, you will have projects as outcome. In HCDE, I heard that the structure is a lot looser and you will have more space to plan out your path of learning. But the trade off is
Mm.
that there's not as much guidance. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great call out. I think also something that came to mind, I don't fully know this, but I've heard that maybe the nature of projects is a little more individual with HCDE, which, again, has its pros and cons. But I think when you're working in the professional world as a designer, the reality is you work with teams, you work with people. Like I don't work with just other designers. I work with engineers, I work with computer scientists, I work with data scientists and policymakers. So um, yeah, I think that's maybe another pro of being in, a group work setting where you can kind of have a constant structure building off of itself.
Yep. So I think those were our last questions, and we're just about hitting the time limit. So thank you so much, Shawn, for joining us. I think we all learned a lot, and for those of us who couldn't join, they'll get to learn from the recording. Um, so yeah, we really value all of your inputs and your guidance and what you taught us about experience design. And yeah, we look forward to maybe hearing from you again and staying in touch. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And great luck with the rest of your club. Bye.
Yeah, thank you so much. Bye.